Chris Gilhaney sits in his car, following along to a recorded guided meditation. He's a rideshare driver in London for an app called Hitcher. He accepts a ride request and waits for the young woman to get in his car. He asks the girl if she works in the building he picked her up from, but the girl is busy on her smartphone, so she initially misses it but says she'd love to be taking advantage of the facilities at the tech giant. Chris is sitting alone in a cafe, looking physically uncomfortable by the buzzing of lights and of the sound of smartphones around him. Eventually, it forces him to leave. He attends a grief support group session. A woman speaks on her daughter's death from suicide. After the session, she talks to Chris and invites him for a drink. Chris goes to her house, and after having sex with her, she talks about her struggle to get into her daughter's Persona account. The company refuses to give her the password, citing their privacy policy, but she only wants to check her late daughter's messages to see if there are any hints as to why she would commit suicide. She is only allowed 3 attempts each day before the site locks her out for another 24 hours. He sits quietly and listens as she tells her tragic story. After she's fallen asleep, he gets dressed and leaves. Chris goes through his routine again the next day. He accepts a ride request from a young man named Jaden, headed for the airport. He asks if he works in the Smithereens building, and the young man answers yes. As they make their way down the highway, Chris tells Jaden that the GPS indicates an accident ahead, so he must take a different route. The young man is so enthralled by his phone that he doesn't even notice what his driver is doing and what's about to happen. By the time he finally looks up from his phone, Chris has pulled over behind another car in a dark underpass and is now aiming a gun at him. Chris instructs Jaden to tie his own hands. As he tries to move him from his car to another, Jaden reveals he's just an intern. This stops Chris cold and confused. He was sent by a stylist to take a bunch of outfits to a Smithereens executive waiting at the airport. The conversation sends Chris into a hysteria. He rants about people's obsession with smartphones and apps like Smithereens. He points out that if he had bothered to put his phone down for a moment, he might not be tied in the back of a car right now. The young man tries to escape, but he loses balance and falls over. Chris tries to shove him in the trunk of his other car, but he keeps screaming about his fear of small spaces, so he allows him to get into the back seat, but laying down with a cloth bag over his head. Jaden complains that he's feeling sick and starts to sit up in the back seat. Chris screams at him to lie back down, but police officers at a gas station see the suspicious sight of a person with a bag over their head in his car. They followed his car, and when Chris notices that he's being followed, he exits the main road, but the cops remain on his tail. He pulls the car over, and so do the cops. Just as one of the cops exits the car, Chris speeds away, turning the situation into a total police chase. Chris is driving so fast that he almost collides with 2 young men on bikes. He swerves into a field and the car comes to a halt. As the cops approach his car, he jumps out with his gun, threatening to shoot the passenger. The cops retreat, but they stop nearby. They call for backup while keeping an eye on the car using binoculars. In the car, Chris removes the bag from Jaden's head and speaks to him. He tells him he needs to talk to Billy Bauer, the passenger's boss. The young man says he's just an intern and doesn't know how to contact him. Chris calmly says he will settle for the most senior staff he knows, which is Hannah Kent, from HR. The only problem is that Jaden's phone is in the other car. Chris briefly loses his cool and repeatedly pounds on the car horn. He then looks up the company's number online and calls them using his phone. Jaden asks them if he could speak to Hannah Kent, then they transfer the call to Hannah, but she's away from her desk. The voicemail recording has her phone number, so they're able to contact her directly. She answers and Jaden explains to Hannah his situation. She didn't believe it at first, but Chris sends her a frightened photo of Jaden with a gun in front of him. While Hannah is speaking to Chris, she uses a notepad to instruct a colleague to call the police and places him on hold. Hannah and another colleague contact the Smithereen executives at the California headquarters. Penelope, the COO, gathers Chanel from the company's analytics team and Dawn from legal to assist in resolving the situation. Back in the UK, Chief Superintendent Grace and a hostage negotiator arrive at the scene. The chief orders the cops to investigate the safety of the owner of the car Chris is driving. The American Smithereen executives have identified Chris's identity through the phone he's calling from. Meanwhile, the young bikers are still nearby and posting updates of the situation on the Smithereen app. The British police have learned the identity of the passenger and started looking into Chris. Penelope finally speaks to Chris. She refuses to grant Chris's request to speak to Billy Bauer, prompting him to raise his voice and warns them that he'll shoot Jaden. Penelope then tells him they're working on getting Billy on the phone, then puts Chris back on hold. Chanel is able to flip the call so that they can hear what Chris is saying even when he is on hold. The press has arrived at the hostage site with vans and helicopters, and the snipers have moved into position. When the cops arrive at the home of the woman whose name the car is registered to, they learn that she died in March of that year and that she was Chris Gilhaney's mother. The chief gets a call from Smithereen, California, and the FBI. She tries to relay Chris's information to them, but the Americans are already aware of all of that and way more. They also reached out to Hitcher and found that he's operating a compromised Hitcher account that he likely got on the dark web, and the account's activity revealed that he spent weeks waiting outside of Smithereen, London until he got a ride request from a Smithereen employee. The Americans also discovered Chris's fiancée was killed in a car accident through his inactive Smithereen account. Hostage negotiator David tries but fails to engage with Chris. He tells him he knows about negotiators and what they do. He warns him that if he doesn't leave, he'll shoot Jaden. They have no choice but to let Billy Bauer know about the situation. Billy Bauer is in Utah, in an isolated glass house for a 10-day silent retreat. An employee finds him inside meditating. She knocks, interrupting his meditation, and tells him about the situation in the UK. Chris logs into his Smithereen account to check the posts on the scene. His account activity notifies the American Smithereen executives. Chris speaks to Jaden. He asks him his age and if he's in a relationship. That question makes him remember a woman and makes him cry. Billy gets on a call with his California staff and the FBI, and he insists on speaking with Chris. They persistently advise him not to. Jaden tells Chris his mother is probably terrified and worried about him, but Chris calms him down and says his mother has nothing to worry about because the gun isn't real. The police as well as the Americans hear this information through the ongoing phone call. The information about the gun being not real is heard by one of the bikers nearby. As the police begin to move in on Chris, one of the bikers posts the fake gun news on his Smithereen account. Jaden and Chris notice the police, and Chris logs into his Smithereen account to keep up with what people are saying about the situation. He sees the post about the gun not being real, so he lets the car window down and tells them it's real. He fires a shot in the air to prove it, and a sniper shoots him in the arm. Chris realizes everyone is listening and warns them that if Billy Bauer doesn't call him in 5 minutes, he will shoot Jaden, and it's final. Billy requests to let him speak to Chris. They continuously advise him not to, but he's able to get Chris's number through the Smithereen system and calls Chris himself. Billy is now speaking with Chris. Chris is briefly stunned to hear Billy on the phone. He first tells Billy that he used to use the Smithereen app all the time, and then reveals that 3 years ago, his fiancée Tamsin was asleep in the passenger seat and Chris was driving. He became bored as they drove along an empty road and took a moment to check a Smithereen notification on his phone. At that moment, their car collided with that of a drunk driver. Billy doesn't know what to say. Tamsin died 2 months later, and while everyone blamed the drunk driver, Chris blamed himself and Smithereen. He blames Billy and his company for making the app addictive. Billy says sorry and tells him that the app wasn't supposed to be like that and starts to rant about how the app has gotten out of control, but Chris doesn't care and says he just wanted to say his piece. Chris says he'll let Jaden go and tells him he's gonna take his own life. Billy tries to stop him and promises to give him anything he wants. Chris takes this opportunity to ask Billy to have the owner of Persona send the woman from his grief support group the password for her deceased daughter's account. Someone from Persona calls the mother to tell her the login details. Chris cuts Jaden free and tells him he can go. Jaden refuses to go and talks to him, telling him not to kill himself. Jaden attempts to take his gun and the two struggle back and forth. The sniper is struggling to get a clear shot at Chris. Meanwhile, the mother is typing in her daughter's Persona password she's just received. The sniper pulls the trigger. People receive and read notifications about the incident but immediately move on with their lives. We are left wondering who was shot, but who do you think it was? If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new release. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.